embodied leadership has an edge over anything conventional because it allows us to access all of who we are. So our great ability to think rationally, cognitively, analytically, our capacity for empathy, and really to take effective action based on sound decisions that we tune into that are congruent with the values that we hold.
Welcome to Rise Leaders Radio. I'm your host, Leanne Mallory. As a leadership coach, I work inside organizations and I focus on helping leaders achieve their whole person potential and meaningfully contribute to their organization's mission. With this podcast, I share leadership best practices, developmental approaches, and stories of exemplary leaders. My guest today is Dr. Chris Johnson. We just finished our call and I wanted to say a few things before I get into the introduction. Chris and I have known each other for several years now. We met in Embodied Leadership training many years ago, and it was a nourishing and energizing conversation with Chris today. We talk about embodied leadership, what it is and why it's important. We talk about her forthcoming book, The Leadership Pause, and spontaneously, Chris just took me through an embodiment exercise, and I hope that you enjoy doing that. For 25 years, Chris has worked as an executive coach, a psychologist, a teacher of embodied leadership, and a certified MBSR trainer. That's mindfulness-based stress reduction. Chris also holds rank as a third-degree black belt in the martial art of Aikido. Good morning, Chris. Thank you for being here. I'm so happy that our paths continue to cross through our work, through our training, our advocacy of conscious capitalism, and just thank you for being here this morning.
I am delighted to be here. Thank you, Leanne, for the opportunity.
Yeah, you're welcome. Let's start by talking about embodied leadership, because I noticed that when I was writing the intro on you, that this may be the first time in my podcast that I'm talking about embodied leadership. And I just want to be really clear about what we mean when we say that. And so can you help us out here?
Yeah, I'll give it a go here. What's really clear from the world that we live in now, a VUCA world, so volatile, uncertain, complex, ambiguous, that term's been bandied about. What's really becoming clear is that the world is moving at a faster, accelerated pace, and that leaders today are finding themselves kind of flat-footed sometimes in applying the old conventional leadership practices. And what both you and I have trained in embodied leadership is actually, instead of starting kind of head down, cognitive, maybe dropping into some emotional intelligence, what you and I have been trained in is to consider the whole package, the whole body as a resource. And as Dr. Dan Siegel, an amazing psychiatrist who writes about these things, would say, how do we start to work from the bottom up versus the top down? So instead of cognition, EQ, we don't consider our bodies at all. We start with the wisdom of the body, which most of us aren't trained in, so it requires a different kind of attention. Then we can tune into emotion, and then we can make great, more effective decisions when we're considering it all. So it's a way of using the wisdom that already lives within us that we're not accustomed to paying attention to inform feeling, relationships, decision-making, and then the actions that we need to take. How's that? Does that sound right? Yeah.
Yeah. And I, right there at the end, as you're talking about, and the actions, what the outside world may see are the actions. So other people are kind of judging those actions and they're resonating or not
Yes.
with how we're showing up.
Yes.
And so whether we are aware of the assessments that we're making of other people or not, we're always making those assessments. And we're keying into things like, is this person walking their talk? Do they feel congruent? When I hear them speak about things like vision and values, and then I watch the actions that they take or how they treat other people, then I have an assessment of, is there alignment there? Do they feel authentic? Oftentimes I think that when we're judging whether we think someone is authentic or not, we're really talking about embodied leadership. How does that sound?
It sounds right. We're talking about embodied leadership and, as you said, the alignment, the congruence between what somebody espouses, what a leader says he or she believes in, and what they can actually take action on. So as you and I know, the traditional, more rationalistic way of viewing leadership, it wouldn't consider the body at all. The body would be simply a transport vehicle to move from one meeting to another. And, in those meetings, we'd be absorbing content as if that were all that were needed. The content's useful, especially in technical areas, right? But the capacity to take that content and relate it as a leader, to delegate with teams, to rally around the conversation, to get everybody's participation, that's more of an embodied skill. Traditionally, and I hate this term, I don't know what you think about it, but it was labeled as a soft skill. But to be attuned into the body is actually the primary skill. And as a primary skill, if we can learn to do this and bring that congruence in, like you mentioned, that's where the power is. That's where the juice is in all of it, right?
I agree. And so I was going to ask you, secondly, why is embodied leadership important? So we just talked about a definition. We're moving now into why we think it's important. And what I heard there is inspiring trust and confidence in the people that we lead or that we just work with. I think more and more in the world of distributed leadership, that we do have formal leaders, but we're all needing to take initiative, take ownership, be committed. And that is also a form of embodied leadership. So it's not just the formal leaders, but being able to take action. And then you started off by saying, in this VUCA world, to not be caught flat-footed is important. And I think that leaders, and I'm going to use that term fairly loosely, we can be a still point in the chaos when things are going crazy, and they just are getting crazier, it seems, these days, that I can ask myself, how can I not get pulled into that? How can I kind of be a stand for something more sane and calm? And although rational is a heady term, it's more thoughtful. Let me say that, a more thoughtful type of leadership.
One of the things I speak about often is a study that was done by for Creative Leadership, and they, in conjunction, I believe, with IBM, and they interviewed CEOs. And of the 1,500 or so CEOs that they interviewed, well over half of them didn't believe that their organizations knew what to do navigating this VUCA world. And just a little bit more than that, so it was upwards of 60%, didn't believe that they themselves as a leader, they didn't know what to do. And these are really smart people. These are really accomplished people. So to be able to hear them and listen to the deep need of how they care for their folks and how they navigate and keep their eye on an unfolding future, embodied leadership has an edge over anything conventional because it allows us to access all of who we are. So our great ability to think rationally, cognitively, analytically, our capacity for empathy, and really to take effective action based on sound decisions that we tune into that are congruent with the values that we hold. right? So those folks, it's like, wow, well, let's get our hands on those folks because they're out in the front and they need a lot of support. And embodied leadership is really a way for them to supercharge leadership.
Yeah, what I heard you say there too, or infer, is this reliance on expertise and our technical capabilities has its limits in the world that we're living in. And maybe it's been this way for a long time and we're just knowing how to put words to it now. But especially now, expertise reaches kind of a dead end. And then we're left with, now what? And so I do think the embodied leadership is a way for us to, like you said, tap into all of that knowing, all of that wisdom. And Chris, I want to read something here because I was looking at your website and you have some really beautiful ways of talking about embodied leadership. So if you don't mind, I just want to read back to you your own words on embodied leadership.
Yes.
All right. Organizations and businesses of all size reflect their leaders. When your energy is high and your actions are congruent with your words, your presence produces trust. With that foundation, engagement and right action follow. It's what draws clients in, creates new opportunities, and prevents you from having to hustle your way toward burnout. Being a transformative leader is about holding a vision for something different in the world. It comes with unique challenges to our attention, our way of being in the world, and our connections with one another. While you can't erase the uncertainty your organization and people are facing, you do have the power to respond to their challenges with intention, integrity, and honesty. I think that is so beautiful. And when I read that, I really look forward to reading the book that you are in the process of publishing now called The Leadership Pause. Can we just talk about then the leadership pause and what that is and,
Sure.
and how that supports all of these other things, embodied leadership, the ability to not be flat-footed, to respond well in VUCA times?
Yeah, thanks for asking, Leanne. The idea for the leadership pause was born out of an experience that I was having about 10 years ago in my own leadership. So there's that. And it was like, well, what is this? Because I can get a little out ahead of my skis sometimes, right? And like so many today. So there's truth there. But in the years that have gone by and the work that I've done with leaders, and the way that the world is accelerating at a pace that's really hard to keep up with, and we know this, some of the research and technology, which we won't go into here, but it's just really hard to juggle everything. And as I have been working with and teaching leaders about how to bring a mindful attention to their daily lives, what became pretty apparent is that there's this one nodal point, and it's the leadership pause. That's it. It's really simple. But you got to keep your eye on that ball because it'll dissipate right away, right? It's going to go away. So the way I define the leadership pause is really, it's a committed action by a leader to deliberately practice pausing. And so there are different kinds of pause. There might be a momentary pause where I step back, take a breath. And in that breath, I can see and observe what's going on between you and I can feel into myself, like, oh, what's important? Am I congruent with my own values here? I can actually look at the broader horizon of work and like, oh, this is what's going on in the world, and take all of that in kind of in a nanosecond. So a pause could be that momentary. It could be a short pause to create a deliberate practice of mindfulness. It could be a weekend pause. I know last year I was on a ski trip with some buddies of ours, and he's a big executive at a tech company. And he said, Chris, this is just the pause I needed to get away and recharge and renew my life.
And those are the things that we often think that we don't have time for. And we hit that
absolutely.
Point of diminishing returns because we think we don't have time to pick our head up. I was just, as I was listening to you, thinking about a conversation that I was having with an executive yesterday that is having to make some tough decisions around workforce realignment, given the new realities of revenue or decreasing revenue. And then what happens in the environment that we're in, we're all, like you and I right now, are on Zoom. The conversations that need to be had in this environment, and how much more difficult it is when we can't really see each other and feel each other. So people's tendency right now is to get more into the detail. Like they want more transparency at a lower level and get more detailed, where more space feels like it's what's needed. So reminding ourselves, taking that pause to say, what is the bigger commitment? What's the bigger vision? What is our mission here? And aligning back around that rather than getting sucked into the details and all of those concerns that are very valid, but they don't get us unstuck.
No, they don't. And if I could just add to this, what it sounds like when you say that, and I've seen this too, and actually I've felt it in myself at moments, is this sort of grappling for more certainty, as if the details will provide a certain handhold to help us get through the kind of craziness. And then I fast forward to a trip that we took down the Royal Gorge on our honeymoon, and we're on a whitewater raft, and you got to have a handhold to hold on to those, and you don't want to let go. And so there's a real human tendency, like, let me hold on. And yet, if you're going through the rapids, it's not so bad. But then sometimes it's like, how do we relax and allow the space to support us? So one of the things that's really important from an embodied learning and embodied leadership point of view is to remember that the space around us is a resource and a nourishment. And we don't tend to think about it that way. But if we can, and then loosen our grip, allow a pause to interrupt our automatic flow, then there's a lot more here to buoy us up while we're navigating.
What do you mean by space? So that space around us can be nourishing. What do you mean by that?
Yeah, that's a great question. I tend to look at a few elements of pause. So one element of pause is being open. Another is the pace. Another is connection. I write about these in the book, but one is about space. And so if you and I look at the rooms that we're in right now, even though we're connected on Zoom, there's a lot more space in this room than there is stuff, right? And that space, while it sounds woo-woo and out there, the physicists among us would have a whole lot to say about what's in this space. But there's a lot of room to allow our tensions to dissipate. There's a lot of room here to let all that go versus holding it tight in our bodies. And I know you can see me on Zoom now, so I'm kind of like crunched up and constricted. And, anybody listening, like, go ahead, crunch up and listen. And like, oh yeah, that's a real fun place to operate from, versus I'm going to take a big breath and pause, allow all that stuff to go into the space, and it helps us be more present. So that's what I mean by space. Does
Absolutely.
that help?
And I think with the awareness, when we become an embodied leadership practitioner or a practitioner of the pause, whatever that is, we start noticing when we don't feel like we have space. So like you said, that constriction, like if you're really contracted, when I was speaking with my client yesterday, I felt it in my body, and I felt my own desire go into problem solving and will answer all the questions. And my whole physical posture started kind of curling in, like I was looking down. My breath was more shallow. So when I recognize that in myself, and of course I can be of no service to my clients if I'm in that space too. So I had to, kind of sit back, pull my shoulders back, broaden my peripheral vision, take some deep breaths. And all of those for me, now that I've asked you the question, those are ways that I bring space into my body to my thinking. And then I can be a lot more resourceful. And whether we're coaching or whether we're leading teams or whatever, once we find ourselves kind of hunched over with the shoulders pulling in and all of that, we are really limiting our ability to provide different perspectives, be more resourceful, and give that space.
Yeah. Absolutely. I mentioned those elements of pause, and we're focusing a little more on space. It's probably because space is the most challenging for me, because I historically get a lot going on myself. And so it feels like there's not enough space. Often people talk about it as time, but it's really space, and it's really about energy. So to your point about what you do to bring alignment, one thing to help listeners, also another thing, in addition to what you said, might be, I often have folks, I do this myself, I often have folks sit at the edge of their chair so they can feel their bum in the seat, and then have a 90-degree angle with their knees, feeling the feet on the floor, and then to breathe up their spine from their tailbone all the way into the crown of their head. They actually get a little taller. You don't have to tell anybody you're doing it. But in fact, this posture allows a certain seeing, so your head's not down. And that uplift actually connects us to something bigger than we are. So we have the support of the ground in the chair, but also like, wow, there's a reason if we're tuned into our purpose. So like, what are we all here for? Yeah. What's the really big yes we want to say yes to?
Well, thank you for saying that, because I do want to tie this in. So an earlier podcast I did, and now I can't remember, it's 1 or 2 episodes ago, I think 2 episodes ago, was a mini podcast. And I was talking about owning your value. And that the first element, or I would say even requirement for owning your value, is to know your stand, what you stand for. And as you were saying, that's your commitment, that's your purpose. That's what am I here for? And I know that you also speak about clarity. And so can you tie together clarity and the pause?
I'll give it a go, Leanne. We'll see how this goes here.
Okay.
Yeah. So for all of those who might be listening, I'm going to reflect here for a moment that when I get on a roll, maybe when you get on a roll, we can get really caught up in our head, those details you mentioned, the stuff on our to-do list, the impact we want to have. And we can have a lot of energy, we would say, from an embodiment point of view, up and high. When there's a lot of chatter in the mind, this is where mindfulness also comes in to help. When there's a lot of chatter, it's really difficult to be clear-headed, clear-eyed, clear-hearted about what's the most important, what's the most relevant action to take in this very, very moment. So clarity, there's a quote by Lao Tzu about, can you be patient enough to let the mud settle so that the right answer can arise? And I'm not always so patient. And I suspect there are people listening who are not always so patient either. And so I want the mud to settle right away, but the mud has a way of settling in its own time. Our minds do too, if we intentionally create the space. And pausing, if we commit to it as a part of the leadership pause, I'm going to commit to pausing, can allow all of that mud to settle so that whatever shows up in this moment as the next right action is the one we see and can move toward. We know from a neurobiological point of view that when we are overly stressed, our cortisol goes up, our vision gets really narrow, we get very pointedly focused, as my husband likes to tell me. He's, Chris, you're doing the pointedly focused thing again. I'm like, okay. So then I know I have to step back, take a breath, so that my vision, you mentioned periphery earlier, that the peripheral vision can widen. That allows us to be more clear-seeing, clear-hearted, clear-headed. Does that help?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. So we have this one set of situations in this VUCA world where we are talking about volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous. And I've seen the antidote for complexity to be clarity, and as you were talking about letting the mud settle, that's what that's like for me. It's like, the world is going to be complex, but I think that we have a way of interacting with the world that doesn't help. And that's when we are kind of thrashing about and reacting. So can we kind of just let that mud settle, or settle your glitter, in order for things to become more clear? I think another situation where we create our own VUCA world, where we have our own self-doubt, all of those things that may cause us to lose confidence in our ability or trust ourselves, that mind chatter starts there as well.
Yes.
And I find that when that starts with me, that I need, like you said, the pause, the spaciousness, and to let that mud settle there. And it really is muddy and murky. And I'm not going to do my best work. I can't take a stand for myself. I can't take a stand for what I think is good and right in that moment if all of that chatter is going on. So I see another benefit of the pause, not just in the VUCA world out there, but the VUCA world that I, at least, create in my own mind.
Well, and Leanne, the reality is it starts there. So there is a real
Right.
world that we live in, but the way that we have come to be in the world, some of us would use the language, the way we're shaped, the automatic reactions that we come with, we've learned those over time, and they work until they don't work anymore. And that's when we bump up against the challenges of a VUCA world outside, but also the challenges of the VUCA world in here, just like you're saying. And pause can be immensely helpful for that. It sounds so simple, but when we invoke a pause, we literally shift our neurochemicals to downregulate and allow our physiological system to relax a little bit. So even like when I was holding on to the handholds on the raft down the Royal Gorge, down the river, there's a way in which even there we can invite a little bit more pause and a little bit more ease, even if we have to hold on. However, if we're not conscious of it, it's not an option because nobody's shared this learning with us and we haven't practiced it. We'll just do what we normally do, which is just get into react mode, which we see a lot of today, right? I mean, it's our biology, but how do we work with it to align and flow more effectively?
Yeah. I was having this vision of you in your raft with a death grip on
That's true.
on those
That's
handholds, And we do need to hold on, but there is a distinction between stabilizing and having a death grip on
That's
something
right.
where like we can't breathe, we don't think right, our head is down, we don't see what the next rapid is. Hopefully your guide wasn't in that same handhold with the head down. I hope that they were looking forward at the next set of rapids and what needed to be navigated there.
Well, in fact, he was. And what was really great is that we went through a number of category 4, and then we did a category 5, and it was like, whoa, you're holding on. But what was great, his name was Joe. He was fabulous because he was calm. He knew the river. He knew that we all needed to have our helmets on, our gear on, have an oar in our hands, have a handhold. So we needed a guide that knew what he was doing, and then we could follow that. And it really does, to your point, make a difference of a handhold versus a death grip.
Mm-hmm.
And we can apply that in not just on the river, but kind of on this river of life that keeps going. And so actually one thing that might be curious for us to even try here, if you're game, would be to just bring our own attention to our hands right now.
Okay.
Just bring your attention to your hands. And I'll bring it to mine, and just allow your hands to fall naturally. And then bring them into a fist, kind of a tight fist. And then just gradually with an out breath, let them go. So that the fingers are pointed down toward the floor. I'm not sure what you're noticing. I'm curious. I can tell you what clients have said. Do you have anything here before I?
Well, I noticed that it wasn't just my fist that were tight, and I wasn't aware that it had moved up into my shoulders and into my jaw, and that I was holding my breath until I started relaxing, and I could feel like my whole body relax. So it wasn't just my hands, it was everything, and I wasn't breathing.
Pretty important to know, right? I mean, if we don't have that breath going, we actually have too much carbon dioxide, we get more anxious, etc. So the breathing is important. And what I've noticed in myself and with the clients I've worked with this very simple exercise, people do start to notice, oh, I didn't know I was holding my breath. I had no idea there was so much tension just in my hands alone and all the way up to my elbows and my shoulders. So it's helping people tune in to the physical sensations in the body, both inside and kind of the sensory experiences we're having outside, that bring us into the moment. And that moment of pause and awareness is really key for all leaders who are aspiring to lead in this VUCA world and be really present to the craziness, how to stay present to it, and maybe even enjoy the ride. That sounds really radical these days. But even, can we enjoy being alive, right?
Yeah, it's like an extreme sport in a office setting or in a business setting. And, maybe if we reframed it that way, it would be a little more exciting and not put us into survival mode. Yeah.
Or that death grip.
Or the death grip.
Or the death grip, for sure. Yeah.
I really appreciate this practice at the end. And I think it's something that we can even, like if we want to practice space, I think one way to do that is just this activity that you just took us through, like, holding and then relaxing and feel that space that we didn't realize that we have around us,
That's
feel
right.
that relaxation in that space. And I also appreciate, Chris, the descriptions that you've given of the pause and how it can be a breath, it can be a mindfulness practice, it can be a weekend where we don't work, so really take a pause for the weekend and just do things that you love. It can be a ski trip, it can be a bigger vacation, but it doesn't have to be something huge. I mean, it can be like pauses throughout the day. And I think those are really invigorating and bring about a lot of resourcefulness for us.
I agree. All of that. And I guess I'll just put a fine point on it. The leadership pause is the deliberate, committed action to practice pausing in various forms. So that you can begin to embody a different way of being that is responsive and not reactive. Because that's where the juice, good decisions, aligned action really comes from.
Okay, so I'm hearing that it's the deliberate commitment to doing it. It's not just if I can remember throughout the day, it's how do I make this a habit?
That's right.
Good. I want to make sure that people, until your book comes out, have a way of getting in touch with you. And so I will link to your website.
Terrific, thanks.
You've shared with me also a link to an article that you wrote for Mindful Leader on the leadership pause. So I will link to that as well. And also your LinkedIn profile. So you have really been active on LinkedIn these days, and it's been like really juicy, useful stuff. So I'll make sure that people know how to connect with you there, because then they can stay in touch with what you're doing. And I know that you offer several times throughout the year different courses. I know that you've got one that's probably happening now as we're speaking, but I just think it'll be good for people to know how to get in touch with you. Is there anything else that you want to share or promote before we close out today?
Thanks for asking. Those would all be great points of contact, and I would really appreciate that and welcome anybody who would like to be in touch or check it out. I periodically offer mindfulness classes for leaders in particular. I do have an embodied leadership program for women that's getting ready to launch here in the middle of October. I'll probably run that again early in the year. That's called Be the Leader, Act with Clarity, Focus, and Empathy. because we need a lot more empathy today than we maybe have in the past. And so those are some kinds of offers that I'm periodically taking care of. I also have a resource letter that goes out twice a month. Once a month, the first Wednesday of the month, it's with some content. And the third Wednesday of the month, it's about a pragmatic practice that people can take and apply today to wherever they're living life and leading. So that would be something folks could sign up with on the website if they want to.
Excellent. Excellent. So I hope that you all really had the same experience that I've had with Chris throughout the years, was we would be in a room and this wisdom just starts pouring out and the heads turn toward Chris and what she is saying. And Chris, I want to thank you very much for being with me today. I have an idea for something else that I want us to cover at another time, but I really appreciate really going deep into the leadership pause and embodied leadership in general. I think that it's an important dimension of our work that we all need to be paying attention to.
Great. Thanks, Leanne, for the opportunity. It's really been delightful. And I'll wish you a great day and great weekend. Take care.
All right. Thank you. If you like what you heard today, subscribe to Rise Leaders Radio on your preferred podcast platform. Your ratings, reviews, and shares are also really appreciated. You can also visit rise-leaders.com for all the resources we talked about today and to work with me if you're committed to making your unique and positive impact. Thank you for listening, and remember, elevate your part of the world.